Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're coming off yet another Minnesota Vikings victory. That is 3 in a row, and so we'll be talking exclusively about the Minnesota Vikings today. First of all, we'll break down that game, talk a little bit more in depth about Kirk Cousins' MVP-worthy streak, which will kind of bleed into our discussion today that Drew wants to have about Kirk Cousins being a legitimate MVP candidate. So we'll spend some time this show doing that, and then we will finish up with the Skol Scale, talking a little bit about where our optimism stands, as well as some of you guys that sent us a message on Twitter.com. So that's the game plan for today. Let's jump right into it. So like I said, the Minnesota Vikings have won 3 weeks in a row now. They stand at 5-2. They're coming off of a 42-30 victory over the Detroit Lions at Ford Field. So busting some of your earlier reservations about playing on the road. Cousins looks very, very good. Coming off,
he looks like an elite quarterback, straight up.
Yeah. Okay.
Right now he does. I mean, am I wrong?
I mean, the last 3 games, you're not wrong. I'm just a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit nervous to even go there.
I am too.
Throwing the word around like that.
Hey, believe me, I am. You know how I root for this team. I'm as cautious as anybody. I'm just saying he's playing at an elite level right now. The past 3 weeks during Sunday noon games, gets a chance this week to maybe show it on prime time. But we'll get into that discussion later.
So that performance statistically looked like 24 of 34 for 337 yards, 9.9 yards per attempt, which is outstanding. 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also was sacked 0 times, which bravo to the offensive line. They continue to play well. And then a QBR of 90.5. Which is absurd, especially for what we've kind of come to get used to with Kirk Cousins. And he took a 141.4 rating out of this game and moved himself into number 1 in the NFL with a 114.3 quarterback rating. So, Kirk Cousins is a hard person to figure out.
Yeah. Very hot and cold.
Very hot and cold, but he has been.
To explain it right now.
He has been absolutely on fire the last 3 weeks. I'm sure every single person has seen that statistic floating around of he's the only quarterback in NFL history for three straight games to have 3 or more touchdown passes and like a rating over 130.
I think it's 300 yards and a rating of 130.
Yeah, there you go.
In 3 straight games.
So he's playing his best football probably of his career. Definitely of his Vikings tenure. What do you make of this guy?
Well, it's tough to. Yeah, this is the guy you wanted when you paid him the 3-year deal for $84 million. This is the guy you're hoping to get. And obviously at this point, up to this point, we would have liked to have seen it more consistently.
Yep.
Saw it in flashes last year. I think to this point now, this is the longest flash, so to speak, that we've seen it. But this is the guy you want, and clearly it seems like Stefanski and Kubiak have found something that's working. I believe the play action rate on the pass calls is like 45% the last 3 games. They've upped it quite a bit from like 26% the first 3 games, or first 4 games. So clearly they found that using play action heavily will play to Kirk's strengths, and we knew going into the season that he was an excellent play-action quarterback, and he's clearly showing that over and over. With every play-action call, it just seems like he's way more comfortable on those plays. He can easily go through his reads. I mean, you have the threat of Dalvin Cook as well as a running threat, and how dominant he's been on the ground. That obviously can help things too. So everything's clicking. It really doesn't seem like this offense has a weakness right now. The offensive line is, I guess you'd call it the weakness, but it's playing at a level where you wouldn't describe it as a weakness. So really everything's clicking. The only question now that you might want to have is, well, there's the prime time game aura, I guess you could say, but also Adam Thielen's injury and how long that will be an issue, and if Olabisi Johnson can step into that number 2 role.
That play action fake is really working for Kirk too. I mean, do you
Yes.
see that? You saw the one play specifically, the touchdown to Adam Thielen.
Oh
If
yeah.
you
Well,
watch
that's
in the backfield there,
the fake outside zone and the entire defensive line and linebackers, the front seven Detroit's on the right side of the field, and Kirk's just standing 20 yards away on the left side of the field.
Alexander
That's all
Madison
the time
took a nice hit to get that touchdown. So ends up being worth it. I guess that's probably something we should talk about. Adam Thielen getting injured on that play, pulling a hamstring. It sounds like he's going to miss Thursday night against Washington, although it hasn't been completely ruled out, but it sounds that way. And quite frankly, I think it's best that he does.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I mean, we'll talk about Washington more later on this week, but obviously I don't think that this is a game that the Vikings necessarily need Adam Thielen to win, and if it means, saving an injury, a longer-term injury, I suppose, I think this is probably, an ideal situation for him to sit out. So something to keep in mind throughout the week. We also saw I believe this is the first game where we got a true elite performance out of Cousins, and then also an elite performance out of Dalvin Cook. Like, there has been kind of a combination out of both, I suppose, where you've gotten one game where Cousins lights it up and Cook is solid, and vice versa, where Cook is very, very good and Cousins is nah. But this week we saw Cook really shine once again. 5.7 yards per carry, 142 yards on the ground. 2 more touchdowns. He's now tied for the NFL lead with Aaron Jones in that category. He was outstanding once again. He bounces off tacklers like it's
stupid, really. You're not supposed to be able to do that.
Yeah, there's multiple situations. I think the one that sticks in my mind is obviously that touchdown towards the end of the game where he ran into the pile and just popped over to the left side and just went into the end zone for 6. And I mean, Cook has gotten to the point where I feel like every single game we have something good to say about him.
Yeah.
He's becoming I mean, is he a top 5 running back at this point?
Oh, yeah. I don't think you can really argue that at this point. The playmaking ability is there. Receiving out of the backfield is excellent. The vision, the balance, it's all there. I mean, there's probably – right now, I think I'd take a healthy Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey, and maybe Zeke over Dalvin Cook right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to – you're also not seeing a super productive season overall from running backs as a whole. I mean, there are a couple – if you check out the leaderboards just on stats, there's a couple interesting guys on there where you probably would not have been expecting to see them out front there on the leaderboard. But, yeah, Dalvin Cook has certainly established himself as one of the premier runners in the NFL. He has another outstanding game. So with Adam Thielen going down – the Vikings were forced to move B.C. Johnson into more of a featured role, or at least a role more commonly used in this offense. And he came out pretty well. He looks to, the Vikings haven't had a very good number 3 receiver since they let go of Jarius Wright, right?
Yeah.
I can't think of a time when they were, they had more depth at this position. And it seems like that Johnson is able to do what Treadwell can't, and we talked a little bit about this last week. But he knows where to be. Like,
yeah,
he gets
it
open.
Sounds simple, but that's. I mean, when you're third receiver in the NFL, you're obviously not going to be, targeted by the other defense.
Right.
In terms of game planning for and whatnot. So your job is to basically suck a defender with you, and if you can, obviously beat that defender and get separation. And he seems to be doing that, and. At the very least, playing, not being, he's keeping the wheel spinning, right? Like, he's not stopping the wheel by any means when he's out there. And it seems like Treadwell would do that from time to time when he was in that third role. So clearly B.C. Johnson has, he's been a key contributor so far, and he's going to have a big night, I suppose, Thursday night, to kind of see what he can really do as a number 2 guy. Because I would imagine, what the Vikings did when Thielen went down is they almost went exclusively with 2 receivers, 2 tight ends almost the rest of the game. It was a lot of Irv Smith and Rudolph in the game with Johnson and Diggs. And I would imagine that will be the case a lot on Thursday. A lot of 2 tight end sets. Smith will be out there a lot. And then Johnson obviously will be trusted to win, as a starting receiver.
Yeah, he scores his first touchdown over the weekend. I think the biggest thing here is that no matter who you trot out there, on offense, Kirk is going to trust them to catch the ball, right?
This is true. Yes.
And that's an awesome quality for a quarterback, because it means, especially, and it shows up in the stat sheet, especially like this week, where it like you balance it out and you balance the targets out to like all different places, and that can be great. But if you have a weakest link out there, which the Vikings had the last couple of years in Treadwell, and you've got a quarterback who's still willing to throw to him, probably more than he should, that's not great. That's not the system that you want to run with a guy like Kirk Cousins, where you throw Johnson out there now, and is he at any point this season, is he going to be, a 100-yard guy with multiple touchdowns? Probably not. But he's a reliable option. So, when you go into a 3 wide receiver set on third down, you don't feel like one of those targets is just like irrelevant right off the snap. You feel confident that Diggs and Thielen are going to get open, but if for some reason neither of them do, you've got a reliable third option there that you can trust to catch the ball when he's thrown to him. And that to me is excellent, especially with the value that the Vikings are getting out of him, being that Johnson's a 7th-round pick. So it's been great to see his kind of development this season and what he adds to this Vikings offense. But the second thing I wanted to touch on here, too, is what you mentioned. Once Thielen goes out, you started seeing a lot more 2 tight end sets, which is something that I think a lot of us believed that we were going to see right from the get-go at the start of this season. So I think it was kind of fun and a good experiment, I suppose, if to see how this offense can expand once Thielen does come back in. Just having Irv Smith Jr. out there more often, and not only that, but having him out there with Kyle Rudolph and seeing what kind of disruption you can cause amongst the defense with those 2 guys out there. It was interesting, and I thought the results were pretty good. 12 targets to tight ends, 10 of them caught, over 120 yards, and a touchdown for Kyle Rudolph.
I think this is pretty cool. So I'm looking at the box now, and the Vikings had 5 receivers. So it would be Diggs, Smith, Jr., Rudolph, Johnson, and Thielen now, if you count him, with a touchdown, that had catches of 15 yards or more in that game. I mean, that you don't see that a lot, and I don't remember the last time. Not that I'm keeping track of a stat like that, but I can't imagine that's been something that's happened recently for the Vikings. So it's clearly this offense is very explosive, capable of a big play at any time. And then obviously you combine the Dalvin Cook factor in the running game, and at any snap whatsoever, you can get a 20-plus yard gain out of this group.
That's obviously a very welcome sight. The explosive plays are obviously a lot of fun. You think about the long one to Diggs that set up the touchdown to seal it. Even the Kyle Rudolph one, which was only 15 yards. I mean, it looked explosive when it was Kyle Rudolph running it, right?
Yes. Felt explosive.
It felt very explosive. And I think it's great to see, Irv Smith getting out there and getting some more action, because this guy ultimately is the future at the position for the Vikings, right?
Yeah.
It's an early round pick. It's nice to get some sort of results, and I mean, I'll take 5 and 60 from Irv Smith every week if he'll give it to us. That's that works for me as a number 2 tight end and a guy that, generally speaking, I don't think a whole lot of people expected too much of this season. So I think that he's had an awesome game too, and you combine that with another 100-yard performance from Diggs, and I think that he's probably happy if you're still monitoring the Diggs happiness scale. But overall, I mean, this is as well-rounded of an offensive performance as you're going to see for the most part. You got a balanced attack with 34 passes attempted and 37 rushes attempted. That's very, very close to a 50-50 split, and something that you like to see. The offense was pretty comfortable throughout. They scored every single quarter. There was no real lull between quality drives, I suppose. I mean, overall, the reason why the Vikings won this game was not because of their defense, and we say that for the first time in probably some time, where this is really an all offensive performance. They needed all of those points that they got, and Kirk delivered them.
Right, and now I think you see a lot of people say, when I tweeted about the MVP thing, obviously a lot of clapback was about how the Vikings in these last 3 games haven't really played elite competition, which is true. But the Giants secondary, not great. Eagles secondary, not great. Lions secondary, I think pretty solid. I mean, one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL, Darius Slay, was all over the field for the most part on Diggs. And then Justin Coleman had actually that clever peanut punch there on Diggs that nearly turned into a turnover.
Yep.
So there's some playmakers on that team, but it is worth noting that like Snacks Harrison left the game with an injury, and you had, I think, Jared Davis did too. So they obviously were dealing with injuries, but it's one of those performances that like an elite offense would be expected to put up a performance like this against a weak defense, and the Vikings did that. So you can't. That argument, to me, doesn't have a lot of weight when you put up these type of numbers. Now, if it had been a mediocre type of game for Cousins, sure, but he lit it up. He made all the throws he needed to make down the field, middle of the field, short. Every throw that he needed to make, and I especially loved the deep shot at the end of the game to kind of ice it with Diggs on that 66-yard connection too, right on the money. I believe in terms of accuracy, in terms of efficiency, he is the best deep pass quarterback in the NFL right now. I think Russell Wilson maybe has him in a couple of numbers here or there, but clearly he's number one or number two on deep throws this year in the NFL, which we knew he was accurate, but when you get him the time, you give him the play action, you get him Diggs and Thielen on the outside, things really start clicking.
Absolutely, and hopefully this will continue to run for the Vikings, as they do have. It seems like they have a couple of weeks here in a row with a bit of a break, I suppose. You're going to get Kansas City on the road without Mahomes, and then this week, of course, playing against Washington. But you hope that this is the type of offense that you can carry into games against Dallas and Seattle that are going to be played under the lights. And I suppose we have to wait a couple weeks before we get an answer to that. But if this Kirk Cousins continues to show up, I mean, this Vikings team becomes a very real Super Bowl contender. For real.
Yeah. If this Kirk Cousins can stay this Kirk Cousins, like, this is a threat to be reckoned with for the rest of the league. My main hesitation with believing in the Vikings this whole time has been whether Kirk can carry this out and be this guy for a whole season. Now, I mean, and that doesn't mean putting up 337, 4 touchdowns,
right,
no interceptions every game, but it just means making the big time throws when they need to be made.
Keeping the offense moving. That was
right.
the biggest thing that I've noticed in the last 3 weeks, is that the offense is consistently moving.
In a game like this, when the defense doesn't put up, or show up the way they can, they're not that elite defense all the time. When you have a game like that where they struggle in coverage, Marvin Jones scores 4 touchdowns on you, you need to have a quarterback that can light up the opposing defense. And Kirk showed that he can do that in this game. That's the type of thing that I didn't, sometimes you can't rely on Kirk to do that. And that's when you pay a quarterback to do, for $84 million. That's what you want your quarterback to do. Did it against the Lions. Can he do it against Dallas, Seattle, Kansas City? Well, I guess not with Mahomes. You might not need it. But the point stands, there's going to be games this down the stretch here, under the lights specifically, Green Bay again, that you're going to need a quarterback that is going to be capable of doing something like this. And the way he keeps playing like this, I'm believing in him more and more.
Absolutely. So for as much belief as we might have, kind of grown into with Kirk Cousins over the last couple of weeks, some of that might have been sucked out of the defense here after they allow 30 points. Now,
well, I'm gonna preface our whole conversation here by saying I feel like the front seven is kind of not immune from criticism, but I feel like a lot of the blame, so to speak, needs to go on the secondary, and I feel like the front seven showed up the way they usually show up. I think it was the back end that really had a rough game, and that was the reason Stafford had his way.
Well, I think that's a fair point here. Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter continue to get pressures. They both had a sack this weekend. They're all over the place. Linval Joseph and Shamar Stephen on the interior I think they're doing their job. I don't really have a feeling one way or the other with those two right now. They're not having the greatest impact in the world, I suppose, but they're also not allowing runs to the interior. Like, that straight up is not happening from there. As pass rushers, I think that you lose something with Sheldon Richardson leaving. That's kind of been a little bit notable, I suppose. But in terms of defending the run, I think they're as good as anyone. So I have no problem with the defensive line either. Now, the linebackers, Eric Kendricks has been among the best in the league.
Yeah,
it's hard to find. It's hard to poke a hole in his game right now.
He doesn't do anything poorly at all.
Right.
Everything is great. Every possible category you want to rank linebackers in, he is among the best. It's unbelievable, really, what he's doing.
So then you've got that. Then the next natural subject would be Anthony Barr. Now, Anthony Barr has been up and down this year. I think that there have been a couple times where he's been positioned, let's say, unfortunately, in coverage, and that has kind of exposed him a little bit. And I think the same can honestly be said of Kendricks once or twice. But again, I don't think Anthony Barr is by a problem here. I think he's been more of an asset than a liability this year, for sure. And there have been times when he's playing at just an unbelievable level, and you're glad that he's stayed here instead of going to New York. So that leads to the obvious place to put the magnifying glass. And like you mentioned, the secondary has largely been the issue in at least this week. And if you think back to the past few weeks, it's always been a concern with
the Philly game too. There was a few plays where like the Alshon play against the Eagles, where if he stays in bounds, he gets that long touchdown. The one that I think of in the Detroit game was when Danny Amendola had that crosser where he caught the pass and turned around, and there wasn't anybody within 25 yards of him. He wasn't even no one was near him. Clearly a miscommunication of sorts, obviously. But that's the stuff that they showed a little bit on Fox, the clip of Zimmer kind of chewing everybody out one by one, going down the line on the bench. I'm sure that's the type of stuff that that bothers him, and I would imagine that'll get cleaned up. But I'm not worried about the secondary moving forward. I do think Stafford's a really good quarterback, and I feel like he's the type of quarterback that would expose a secondary like the Vikings on their bad day.
He throws for over 300 yards on a lot of teams.
No, yeah, he does. That's the point. But against this type of performance would probably not win you the game. Down the road, if you play this way against Russell Wilson, you're probably not going to win the game, right? Because chances are Kirk's not going to do what he did, especially against that defense in Seattle. So typically you're going to be punished for it. Just happened to get another, unbelievable performance from Kirk on the offensive side to kind of hide the issues, so to speak.
Yeah. Marvin Jones, too, 4 touchdowns. I will not be talking about Marvin Jones anymore because anytime I open
But you will in a positive light, not in a negative light.
I'm just not going to – I'm just going to keep his name out of my mouth straight up, I think. So
But it is funny to note, though. So Marvin Jones has had 2, really, really good games against the Vikings in his career out of, 7.
Right.
So he's had 2 that are unbelievably good fantasy games. He had $140 and 2 touchdowns. Thanksgiving 2017, and then obviously 100 yards, 93 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Vikings yesterday. They lost both of those games. The Lions did. So, I mean, maybe it's moving on in the future. You just say, "Hey, Marvin Jones, get yours, man," and we'll take the W. That's the spin zone on that one.
I mean, that works for me. As far as defending the run, I mean, the Vikings were as advertised. They allow 81 total yards. It's split between 3 different guys. Kerryon Johnson missed a lot of time. But the Vikings' run defense has been as good as anyone in the league. I believe they rank top 5 right now. It's just this is going to come down to the pass defense, and really it's on 2 guys. It's Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes who we need better performances out of. Rhodes especially, I feel like he's the one that's getting the most criticism from people on Twitter to local newspapers and radio stations, whatever.
Yeah. For what it's worth, Rhodes only did allow 5 yards yesterday. It just also happened to be 2 touchdowns. So, however you want to look at that, but he only allowed 5 yards on I think 2 completions. I think they were just both Marvin Jones touchdowns. Yeah.
So Marvin Jones kind of has Xavier Rhodes' number, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. But he does. I mean, even if it is just that for him, I think you got to expect a little bit more out of your high-priced cornerback there. And Waynes, I don't think that Waynes has been bad, but he also doesn't show up at the wrong times. The first Marvin Jones touchdown, he just got embarrassed on that that move that Jones put on him.
Yeah, that tackle.
And really the entire defense too, because he should not have scored on that play. Let's just be real. But in general, I think that the biggest question mark on your defense is your secondary. And against Matthew Stafford, I'm with you, like you said. He does this on a lot of teams. I mean, he's a good quarterback. You do have to expect more from this unit as a whole, though, I think, especially when they're your backbone. But to me, this game is an outlier. It's not the standard for this defense by any means. I have no real concerns. Do you have any concerns with this?
No, I mean, not really. It's not. Again, I do think a lot of it was the fact that this game did turn into a shootout and Stafford got into a rhythm, and you get a miscommunication here and there. I think that's a large part of what was going on. Plus, I think even like the deep throw to Marvin Hall, I believe. I mean, that was covered really well. It was just Stafford threw a dime. Stuff like that'll happen too against good quarterbacks. And for what it's worth, I'm looking at the rankings right now. The Vikings are still number 6 in the NFL in net yards per attempt allowed in passing. So that, I mean, they're still an elite defense there. Obviously, they've allowed 14 passing touchdowns, which is 24th. But like we were talking about the run game, they're number 7 in rush defense, so they're still good there. I think this game, if there's any chance for or any need for a get right game, so to speak, I feel like Washington provides that this week. So they put up a big goose egg this week. Now, granted, that was in the rain, but Case Keenum and Terry McLaurin and Trey Quinn and Paul Richardson come to town. Not quite as threatening as Stafford and Marvin Jones and Kenny Galladay and Amendola.
Kenny Galladay, by the way, where was he?
And hey, maybe Rhodes was, I haven't watched the game again, but maybe Rhodes is a big part of that. Or maybe the game plan for Detroit just called for like 10 billion targets, Marvin Jones. I don't know. But Kenny Galladay is generally, that was my biggest worry, I think, was Galladay getting a beat or beating Rhodes, and Galladay didn't do much besides one catch.
I did see today, too, that this is only the second time that the Vikings have won a game when the Mike Zimmer defense allows 30 points or more. Just something to keep in mind moving forward here. This is an excusable defensive performance because of how Kirk Cousins played. If this becomes a trend, I think we'll have more questions to answer in the future. But
you know what the other game was, by the way? The 30 or more points game that they won? It was the Redskins game against Kirk Cousins in 2017.
It was. Yes, it was. Mark that one down in your notebook. Let's talk a little bit more about Kirk Cousins now, but in more of a universal light, how he compares to his peers, which are mostly going to be at his position because, let's just be real, the MVP award is the award for the best quarterback. For the most part. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. I think there's one guy that we'll talk about that isn't a quarterback here. But where does Kirk Cousins stand in the MVP race as of this week? So through 7 weeks, Drew has made the statement that Kirk Cousins has entered the MVP race, so we will be discussing where he stands in that race, how far down the list you have to go until you find his name. But I to a degree, I think I'm with you here, that he might have entered the discussion.
Yeah, you have to have the discussion at this point. After those last 3 games, the Vikings are, what now? They have the 3rd best record, I believe, in the NFC. So just from that, you're going to have to credit the guy who's sort of leading that charge. And these last 3 games, Kirk has played at an MVP level, straight up. Now, the 4 games before that, definitely, has been at an average quarterback, probably at best, those first 4 weeks. Yes. I'll give you that. But if he's going to continue on this pace, which is a big if, I'm sure, but he's definitely in the running. Now, I have sort of put together a top 10. I tweeted it out today for those who follow me on Twitter, so this is going to be repeated for you, but I have Aaron Rodgers number 1 because the receiving core he's throwing to right now without Devontae Adams, those guys are probably playing in the CFL. So I'll credit Rodgers and the Packers for being 6-1. Number 2, Lamar Jackson, because he's doing everything for the Ravens offense. I think they're on pace to break the rushing team record for the season. And Lamar Jackson's running for like 100 yards a game. So plus he's throwing it. I think he's on pace with like Tom Brady for passing yards too. So he's doing everything. Russell Wilson's 3, and he would be probably 1 if he hadn't laid an egg against the Ravens yesterday. Then I have Tom Brady just because he's undefeated and Tom Brady. But the competition they've played this year is hilarious. Like if you go look at their schedule,
right,
it's bad. It's bad. And their one tough win, so to speak, is the Bills, who have played nobody as well. So, and I have Kirk at number 5. he's really surged up the list the last few weeks, obviously. Number 6, I got a few comments about this one because he's not going to be in the list in a few weeks, but Teddy Bridgewater with the Saints.
Okay.
5-0. He's going to be off the list in a couple weeks. So I have Christian McCaffrey 7, and I feel like a lot of people think I disrespected him here, which maybe I did, but he's a running back, and I just won't. I'm going to favor quarterbacks here forever in the MVP discussion, just because, I
think you're right to do that.
I see what the Chargers are doing right now. Melvin Gordon held out. He is their superstar stud. Austin Eckler is clearly, he's come in this year and is so much better than Gordon, so much more effective. Gordon has had 36 carries this year. He hasn't had one for more than 9 yards. It's tough for me to favor running backs that much. Now, granted, Dalvin Cook, McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley clearly make a huge impact on their team, but it's way more quantifiable, I think, with quarterbacks. So I'm going to favor them in that discussion. But then I have Deshaun Watson 8, Dak Prescott 9, and then I have Dalvin 10 just for fun. He's another Viking I can put on there. But that's my list. I don't know how you feel about it. I don't know what our listeners feel about it, but I do think Kirk has entered the discussion. And if it comes down the end of the season, that Week 16 game against the Packers on Monday night, it's very possible we're looking at sort of an MVP, winner against the MVP type of thing. So
I didn't come up with the top 10 because
no, I didn't expect you to.
I think that this award, first of all, I think it's worth noting that you didn't include Pat Mahomes on your list at all
for injury.
Right. I just think that just to point this out here, he's going to miss enough games here where he's not even going to be in the discussion when it's all said and done. They just don't hand out awards to guys that miss 4 or 5 games. Period. So
which is also why Bridgewater is not going to be on it, or Drew Brees, or anything like that.
Right. So that really narrows down the competition here. So to me, it comes down to probably 5 guys, and honestly, Kirk Cousins probably is in that discussion. Because you look at it with, I think Russell Wilson is still number 1 for me. He did lay an egg yesterday against the Ravens. You're not wrong about that, but he has the statistics and he has the record, and it looks like Seattle is going to be challenging for that top spot. I just can't see the 49ers' way of playing football holding up long enough for them to hold off Seattle if they continue to play the way that we kind of expect them to.
Yeah.
So I think that Russell's probably the number 1 guy, the guy that I think is most likely to win the award. You've also got Aaron Rodgers, like you said. He's playing with basically nothing around him other than Aaron Jones. The Packers are leading the NFC North, which is the toughest division in football. He's got solid statistics, I suppose, and they're coming off of a pretty explosive performance against the Raiders. It's his chances are only getting better, I suppose. To me, Deshaun Watson is kind of in the same place as Kirk Cousins. Watson has been outstanding for, I believe, 3 weeks this year, and then he's been okay last week when he lost against Indianapolis. But he's also had a couple of not-so-great games, too, which is exactly what we can say about Kirk Cousins and his candidacy here. Where 3 great games, couple games, and a couple of not so great games. Are those guys still real MVP candidates? You have to ask the same question with both Deshaun Watson and Kirk Cousins. And to me, due to those injuries, those guys are both going to be in here right now. Dak Prescott is also right there as well, but he is the Cowboys simply don't look like that good of a team. And it's hard to consider, if the Cowboys continue to play the way they do and they squeak out, an NFC East crown, it's going to be hard for anyone to justify someone like, like Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson who, end up winning 10, 11, 12 games this year with the same type of statistics. They're just going to eliminate themselves from the conversation. Mm-hmm. So that leaves Christian McCaffrey as the only other guy here that's realistic to me, and that's just because he's carried a Carolina team which is working with a backup quarterback, one that has actually played very well. No disrespect to Kyle Allen, but Christian McCaffrey has to be a real candidate here, just because he's doing a lot of the same thing that 2012 Adrian Peterson did, and that's the only way you get on.
I think he's better because he's receiving, putting up numbers in the receiving column too, which Peterson didn't do.
Well, that's the only way for a running back to get in this conversation, is if he's basically playing without a quarterback. And I guess that's not necessarily the case, but you're playing with two different quarterbacks. You're trying to assimilate both Cam Newton and Kyle Allen into an offense. I mean, those are two very different skill sets. But the constant there in Carolina and the 4-2 record has been behind Christian McCaffrey for the most part. When he goes, they go. So that to me are the most realistic candidates right now. I think that Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson will be there at the very end, though, and I think that's what it's going to come down to. Just because I can see Houston picking it up, and I see Seattle.
Yeah, no love for Lamar.
Powers. Oh man, I didn't mention Lamar. I think he kind of falls into that Deshaun Watson range with me, because let's be real here. Like, he played well enough to win against Seattle, but that passing performance was not good. That was straight up, he didn't play well as a passer.
It depends how you feel about his. It's like his total contribution to the offense is as good as anybody, right?
Okay, right.
But the fact that so much of it is rushing kind of takes away from it. If you focus solely on his passing performances, it's not nearly as good as some of these other guys, but I think he does more than enough in the running game to kind of make up for that to me. And if the Ravens continue on this pace, they're 5-2. That was an impressive win at Seattle.
Yep.
If they stop playing the eggs like they did against Cleveland,
that's a question mark with Lamar too. Is just how good the Ravens are, just in general. I mean, this trophy is going to go to, more than likely, the best quarterback of a top 3 team.
Yep.
Right? Most of the time, that's kind of how MVP works. I don't know if the Ravens are anywhere close to that, because they're questionable. They, like you said, they had the big win against Seattle. They also had a couple of not so great games they've played in the past. I question Baltimore more than I question Lamar, I suppose. But I also don't think that I think that he is like Cousins in the sense where he is prone to issue, whether that's fumbling the ball or throwing an interception. Granted, he's been pretty good. He's been pretty good at holding on to the ball as far as a passing. What am I trying to say here? He's been good at holding on to the ball as far as passing is concerned. He hasn't been an interception risk, but he still fumbles more than anyone in the league. So that's a concern to me as well. Ultimately, what I think it's going to come down to is Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, and then Aaron Rodgers. I think those are going to be the 3 guys. When it's all said and done here, those are the 3 teams that are going to be, good, very good teams, and then obviously very good quarterbacks on top of those teams.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's wild just even thinking about that. Our MVP discussion was lengthy, and we mentioned a lot of guys, but we did mention Kirk Cousins in like a serious manner and with a straight face, and we would have laughed at ourselves for doing that 3 weeks ago. So
I mean, he is right there statistically, and the Vikings are a really good team. He fits our qualification, right? I mean,
yeah,
good team, good statistical production. I mean, the Vikings just came off of a win in which he led the win. You could probably say the same thing about the Philadelphia game, too.
You could definitely say he was the reason that the Vikings won that game against the Lions.
So
right?
That's what an MVP does. He carries his team to victory. Now, I think the biggest reason why people are skeptical to put him here is how long is he going to stay here, right?
Right. That's really the thing I've been, some of the replies and stuff I've been getting are, he's done this against 3 bad teams, or,
yeah.
Oh, we all know what's coming next, primetime game, this type of thing. Like,
yeah.
And I get it. Like, I totally get it. I'm with you on that. Like, we have to see it more from him, and against Seattle, against Dallas, against Green Bay at the end of the year. Like, we would like to see it then. But for right now, pace he's on, he deserves to be in the conversation at the least.
think he's in the top 5 right now after 7 weeks. Right? I think that's fair. Top 5?
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I got on my list. So
that's pretty funny. He would have been in like the 50s after like the first 3 weeks, which just shows you how quickly things can change.
Yes, for sure.
In the NFL. So, all right, let's jump into our optimism level, where we stand on the Skol Scale. We'll finish up the show talking about that and some of your responses as well, and that'll be that for this week. So why don't you catch us up?
Yeah, so Skol Scale, once again, for those who don't know yet, 1 to 10 scale, your Viking optimism. We've been updating it every single week after the Vikings win or lose.
Wait, this is probably a good point to check in as how far low did we go? You were at 5, right? And I was at 5.5. Yeah. And I was at 5.5, and then we had other people that came in. We had someone that was as low as a 4, I believe.
Yeah.
So
yep.
That's kind of an interesting range of where we're at.
I think I went 5 after the Bears game.
Yeah, I was in the same place. I said 5.5, which is not much better.
I think I was 6.5 or 6. No, I was a nice 6.9 before this game.
Okay. So where do you stand now?
I'm at 7.5 now because that's a pretty big jump. This is a Kirk Cousins game where, again, we talked about it already. The defense didn't show up, or at least the secondary didn't show up, and Stafford had his way with the Vikings defense. If you'd have told me before the game that Stafford's going to throw for 364 and 4 touchdowns, Marvin Jones is going to have 93 yards and 4 touchdowns, all that. Danny Amendola, of all people, is going to have 100 receiving yards.
I said he was going to be a problem. I called.
You did say that. You did say that. But if you had told me all those things before the game, I would have said the Vikings lost. I would have nearly guaranteed a Vikings loss, but Kirk Cousins showed up, carried this team to a win, and so that jumps me up to 7.5. And I think it's always going to stay at that level, so to speak, until I do get that game from him, against a good defense or on a primetime, in a primetime game. But for now, 7.5 is where I'm at, and I think this is a playoff team. As long as I think the Packers are going to win the division still, but I think the Vikings are going to be in a good spot for a wild card game moving forward.
Okay, so I was at 7.5 last week. I'm going up to 8.5.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm in. I'm ready to be hurt.
Not already.
I'm ready to be hurt again. I have seen it with. I mean, okay. Let's talk about our concerns with Kirk Cousins in general, right? It's primetime games. That's basically the only concern now, and that's part of the reason why I'm up so high here. Playing on the road away from Minnesota, playing in important games, games that matter, and beating good teams. To me, he couldn't play in a primetime game last weekend because this game was scheduled at noon, but he beat an NFC team on the road, or not just the NFC team, an NFC North team on the road in a, quote, hostile environment. I still think the Lions are a good team. They got screwed last week, and
it's true.
And then we've got this week where they played with the Vikings for most of this game. There was a point where we were very nervous when Dan Bailey missed that field goal, and that was late in the game. So that's a good team to me. He checks off all the boxes right now. So I mean, this and that's my only real concern. I mean, maybe next week if the defense lays an egg against Washington, then we might have some real concerns on the defensive side of the ball. But as far as I'm concerned, the biggest issues on defense are stuff that you can kind of fix with, maybe it's a quirk here and there with Rhodes. Maybe it's a coverage issue with Waynes. Maybe it's not having a good enough rotation with all of these different, athletes that you have in the secondary. Maybe it means giving Mike Hughes more time. Stuff like that. But
I have noticed Jaron Kearse is playing a lot less now that both Alexander and Hughes are available. But maybe that's it. I don't know.
The point being here is that the biggest question mark that I have is I think it's something the Vikings can fix internally. And this team is playing so well that I think they can beat anybody. And that's what the Skol Scale is all about, right? 10 is we're the best team in the league. All right, well, I'm saying 8.5, which to me is we're a top 7 team in the league.
Yeah.
I think the Vikings can play with literally anybody. I just want to see it, right? That's the confirmation I need to push this thing up to a 9. It's can we play against, we're going to get a primetime game on Thursday, and I guess that's not really it's going to not count. Let's just be real because it's Washington. So next primetime game, it's basically Seattle or Dallas, and those two games are well into the future. 8.5, seeing, MVP caliber play from my quarterback. Dalvin Cook looks like a top 3 running back. The wide receivers are everyone's catching the ball, and everyone's catching touchdowns. Adam Thielen will be back and healthy. This isn't a major concern long term. I mean, what's not to be hyped about in Minnesota? That's where I'm at right now. I'm
all right.
I'm not over
you're
the
almost
moon.
all in. You're almost all in.
I'm not over the moon, but I'm definitely approaching the moon. Like, that's where I'm at.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I will say one thing that I really wanted to mention during my presentation, if you will, of the Skol Scale was the deep shot to Diggs when they're up 5, I believe, with a couple minutes left or 3 minutes left, something late in the fourth quarter, where they had to kind of essentially they could have tried to run the clock out and just pound Dalvin Cook, which probably would have worked. But Mike Zimmer said he didn't want to, quote, cower and want to take that shot deep. And when Kirk's feeling like that, when you have Diggs out there, beating any corner he looks at, I love the aggressiveness there. And that's the type of attitude I think Kirk likes, for one, but I also think that you're gonna win games that way. And because Zimmer knew his defense, his secondary wasn't quite stopping Matt Stafford in that attack. So if the Vikings would have had to punt, I would have been very concerned about the result of that game. So he just said, you know what? Let's just not punt. Let's just score, and that'll end the game.
And we'll take that all the time. Let's hear where our faithful listeners are at.
Yes. So Sam Newman, our guy at NoomSamN on Twitter, he said an 8. He said, the balls on display by Kirk and the Vikings offense yesterday were unlike anything in recent memory. I am once again charmed by this team and will continue to be until further notice. Thank you. #Skol.
We're in dangerous territory, but he's right. I mean, that's what it is. That's the perfect description of it. I am definitely charmed by this Vikings team. There are so many things that I like about it. Honestly, I'm all in on that take. That's where it is.
Offensive line's playing way better.
No sacks. No sacks. 0.
Who was it? It was Michael Irvin, maybe, had the hot take or the bold prediction. Whatever.
Yeah, that'd be 7+ sacks for Detroit.
Sacks, yeah.
And they got 0.
They got 0.
Oh.
This is from Edwin von Brodmarkle at Nemox7. He says 7. Defense is concerning of the last 2 weeks, but when the offense is clicking this good, watch out. Yeah, I mean,
if
you score 42 points, you're going to win most games.
Yeah, I hear him on the. I'm just not ready to be concerned about the defense. Let me just have this one, and I don't want to talk about the defense.
Here's the thing. I chances are now I'm going to knock on wood right now because we know what happened last time the Vikings were 17-point favorites at home.
Yeah.
But I feel like the concerns about the defense will be minimized come Friday.
Yeah. Probably. I think it's going to go one way or the other after Thursday's game with the defense. We're either going to be on high alert or we're going to be saying, no big deal.
That's true. It's either going to be panic,
if Case Keenum torches the Vikings,
fire in the hole, panic, or yeah. All right, last one we're going to highlight here is it's Bubka at Bubka2K5. He's at an 8. Vikings continue to show that if Cousins gets going early and they protect him, he can ball. The Packers looking better is scary. Vikes have to finish with a better record than them to win the division because the Lions and Bears won't beat them. Looking at their schedule, I don't know if it'll happen. So he's talking about the Packers and that looking ahead at their schedule, thinking they're probably going to have the division at this point unless the Vikings can grab the same record or win that. I don't know how the tiebreaker works, but if they were to win against the Packers at home,
they're going to be in trouble if it comes down to a tiebreaker. So because the Vikings are 1-2 in the division, and the Packers are 3-0, and
that's right. That's the Vikings, doesn't it? Yeah.
The Vikings basically need to run the division, run the table in the division, and then beat. That includes beating the Packers.
They have to have a better record than the Packers, straight up. That's probably what it comes down to after losing already 2 division games.
Yeah, so they would have to lose once to the Vikings, and then they'd also have to lose to the Bears specifically because the Bears lost because then the next tiebreaker would be record between common opponents.
Yeah.
So they need to lose to the Bears specifically. That needs to happen, and the Vikings need to go and beat the Bears in order for this to be a tiebreaker situation where if they're both 12-4, then they would win it because they beat the Eagles and the Packers didn't. And I just did that all in my head, by the way. So you guys should be. That was impressive stuff by me right there. But the Packers. I mean, I think the Packers have I was looking at their schedule earlier today, and I think that they've got a pretty tough road here. They got the Chiefs next week, so they're going to dodge Mahomes. But the Vikings
as the Vikings are.
Right, as the Vikings are. Now, listen to the rest of this, though. So you go at Chargers, which doesn't really matter, home, away, whatever. That's still
it's going to be a home game for them anyway.
Yeah, that's still a good team. The Chargers are better than the record says they are. That will be a tough contest. I'm not going to say the Packers will lose, but I'm saying that's a tough contest. They could lose. Then they have to play the Panthers at Lambeau. So Lambeau, Panthers are a good team, right? They're 4-2. They're playing good football right now. I'm not saying I'm not a huge believer in Kyle Allen.
In that one.
Probably taking the Packers, but another tougher game, right? And then they go to Levi Stadium, I believe is what it's called now, in San Francisco, and play the 49ers on the road. So those are the next 4 games. I think there's a real shot that they're 2-2 in those games, probably 3-1. But the Vikings, on the other hand, have a pretty favorable situation here. So ultimately, I think that this is going to, the Packers are going to have to play on the road a lot more than they have been recently. They've been playing most of their games at home, if you guys haven't been noticing. I think there's a very real chance that this could come down to, a couple of 11-5 or 12-4 teams. And, the Vikings are going to have to get their punches in when they can, like this Thursday, for example. But I do think that there's a very real chance that, that they will be right there with the Packers at the end of the season. And a few things need to fall in the Vikings' favor, like we said. But I do think it's plausible still. And I'm not sure yet how much better the Packers actually are than the Vikings. Just give it some thought. They're coming off of a win over the Raiders. I know the Vikings already lost to the Packers, but you can make a pretty educated argument saying that they shouldn't have lost that game, I suppose. It's mostly theoretical, but you can make that argument, I guess. So
you can make the argument. I mean, let's see. They've beaten the Bears, who don't look great right now. By the way, my under wins total bet for the Bears is looking okay right now because their schedule is brutal the rest of the year.
Right.
And they beat the Vikings, beat the Broncos at home, lost to Philly, which looks rough right now because Philly is all kinds of a mess right now. They then beat Dallas at Dallas, which is very much a quality win.
That's a good win, yeah.
It's a very quality win. Then they, whether or not they deserved to win against Detroit last week, but they won that game at home, and then they beat Oakland at home. So they've only played 2 road games this year out of 7.
Yep.
They played at Dallas and at Chicago. Then they played 3 straight home games: Vikings, Broncos, Eagles. Then at Dallas, and then they 2 more home games in a row: Detroit and Oakland. And then they play for road games left. They have at KC without Mahomes, at the Chargers, which is not really a road game because that's going to be more Packers fans anyway at that game. Then they have at San Francisco, at New York Giants, and then at Vikings, at Lions for remaining home games. So they have 6 home or road games left.
And yeah, I don't think that they're that much better than the Vikings right now. If we played the Packers next week at home, the game that's left on our schedule, I think the Vikings would be not.
You think they'd win that game?
I think they would win, and I also think that they would be projected to win by Vegas and everyone else. So
that's actually interesting to think about what the spread would be in that game. I think it'd be pretty close. I think
it would be close,
even.
But I think that they would give the Packers points. That's where I'm at with that. I think that these are 2 teams that are, they're trending in similar directions, but both of that is up. And I don't think the Packers are trending upward any faster than the Vikings are right now. It's basically what it comes down to. I think the Packers very easily could have the same record as the Vikings if one penalty goes a different way.
This is true.
So
this is true.
That's kind of where I stand with that. But I guess I hold the same concern as you, and I guess the guy who wrote that tweet, that it's going to be frustrating towards the end of the year if the Vikings are 12-4 or something like that, and Packers looking at a 5 seed.
Yeah, because I do not like the idea of the Vikings going on the road for a wild card game in the playoffs.
Neither do I. That home game would be very important. So
yes,
I guess it's something to keep an eye on as we move forward this year. But any final thoughts here before we close it out?
I think so. My lock of the week for the Johnnies beating the Tommies actually did happen. So it doesn't count towards our bets, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. As always, you can subscribe on iTunes. Give us a 5-star review if you want to. You can also watch us on YouTube, like the videos there, or give them a thumbs up, whatever. I think that's right. And yeah, we appreciate you guys listening, and we will catch you later on this week.